I'm Lance Pillarsdorf. I am one of the co-founders and CEO of Advertising Week, and it's a great pleasure to be here for our 19th edition of Advertising Week New York here in the Penn District. And I'm fortunate to be sitting down here with the CEO and founder of Swayable, James Slezak. James?
Yeah, great to be here. 19 years, yeah.
I used to be younger. But James, tell me a little bit about your journey. Tell me about founding the business and the story.
Yeah, well, Swayable, some of you probably know, some of you don't, measures persuasion. So it's a tech platform, it's a startup. Not 19 years old, sixth year this year. Basically, we're a group of scientists, mostly, and marketers, and we were just really obsessed with this question of what changes people's minds. A lot of the work in the early days was on social issues and causes like climate change. And I think, when you think about an issue like that, and you argue with someone at Thanksgiving, this question is just very front of mind. What is persuading? And I think it's also exactly the problem of most, big picture marketing. How do you actually change somebody's mind? The little head that's opened up here in the Advertising Week logo.
Yeah. That's great. And so we are here in the Trailblazers and Trendsetters track. So, I guess using that theme, what do you see as what Swayable is doing in terms of trailblazing around the fundamental shift that the overall company is driving?
Yeah, well, we do measurements. So we're in the business of giving data, selling data to marketers. And I think we've spent 15 years getting a lot of data. People have seen lots of dashboards, lots of numbers, wiggly lines that go up and down. But fundamentally, most of that data has been about how you distribute marketing messages to consumers. Are they getting reach? Are they getting engagement? Am I getting conversions? And that's great if you're sort of running conversion campaigns, direct response campaigns. That industry, or the contribution that tech industry's made to the work of marketers has been great for that kind of marketing. But I think the big pendulum swing here is people have sort of realized that if you're telling an upper funnel story, that's about changing intent to purchase or consideration for product or anything about brand equities, that click-through rate's not telling you what you need to know. You need the data about are you persuading. So that's kind of the trend that we see ourselves really helping to push the pendulum on.
That's great, that's great. And now for the non-scientists, many like myself, and I don't know if everyone else is a scientist in the room, so this is a question I'm going to ask you to kind of dumb it down for us non-scientists. So you guys use randomized control trials, RCTs, that's typically associated with scientific research to gauge the impact of these campaigns. Tell me a little bit about that and how you guys are using that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I sort of saw this problem firsthand when I was in my previous role in media. I was at the New York Times, and we'd get some of this research around brand decisions, and I realized that it was being done in methodological ways that you wouldn't do if you were doing science, and really that means you're not really learning as much. The evidence for the decision you're trying to take and whether it's the right one is just a lot weaker if you use other methodologies. So look, in science, you want to prove something, you need to do an RCT if you can. That's why if you want to get a drug approved, for example, that's what the FDA is going to look for, because it proves you've got a control group and a test group, and you're basically looking at the outcome for both groups. In our case, you're surveying them. Do they love the brand? Do they want to buy the product, the car, the muffins? And if the thing you're doing, in other words, your advertising, is working, then the group that you do that to should want it more. It's really quite straightforward. The devil's in the details, though, because that used to take 2 months, basically. So if it takes 2 months and costs 6 figures of investment, you're probably not going to do it, and probably for good reason. But by getting a really crack group of data engineers and scientists on it and building tech that sped that up by 30x, now there's less of a reason not to do it.
That's great. And so how can brands utilize these RCTs for pre-testing their ads?
Yeah, I mean, basically, we try to make it really simple. We sort of think of it a bit like, driving the Ferrari. We sort of want to hand you the keys and give you the steering wheel versus kind of get into a bunch of engineering. So basically, the users will upload the ads and make sure that the definition of success is right. In other words, this is a consideration campaign. I want to see consumers considering my product more. And then they hit go, basically. And they get a bunch of breakdowns that show exactly who's getting lift in which target segments.
That's great. And this pre-testing, it provides, significant, data-driven insights. And how will they use that before they allocate their media budget?
Yeah, well, this is what I think is one of the big revolutions. I mean, you used to not know if the campaign worked until afterwards.
Yeah.
And you make a whole bunch of assumptions, you know, you can do some research, but, you know, do you know that actually this story or this concept versus that one will generate more lift or not? Basically, you know, people would recognize that they didn't know that. So I think you go from that world to a world where you go into those decisions knowing in advance, you know, having the best available evidence that the creative choice you're making is going to generate lift. You know, that completely changes the game. We're seeing a lot of brands now investing a lot more upfront in how they do that testing more ideas, testing them with prototype content so that they can, you know, explore a range of different approaches to kind of reaching consumers and changing their minds versus kind of just figuring out at the end if the number went up.
And you said, you talked about the speed of decision making. 2 months, and and now we're 30 times quicker than that. Why is that so crucial for these campaigns?
Yeah, you know, basically the results are only as useful as the decisions that they can drive. And you talk to any marketer, you know, they're not really able to sit around and build a 2 month, you know, wait into their plan. They've got a lot happening, stakeholders, creative processes, agencies, you know, media budget. So getting it tomorrow just, you know, makes it possible to to use it. Getting it 2 months later is kind of like you're just grading the homework from the, you know, the midterm you did 2 months ago. And that's kind of why creatives often have found themselves in real tension with data too. You know, they don't want people grading their homework when it's too late to act on it.
That's great. And you talked about lift a second ago. And why is it so essential for brands to transition from some of the vanity metrics and engagement data to leveraging this persuasion for driving impact and purchase?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the real top business level of the company, it's about what is this marketing function there for? You know, you're the CEO or the board with shareholders, you put money in and you want an increase in consumer favorability, demand, and intent to purchase. And so if you're not measuring that, I mean, it's sort of a complete disconnect with the business function that these entire operations are playing. So, you know, I think the sort of 15 years of being trained how to sort of optimize for the media platforms have kind of, you know, created this effect where you sort of see a lot of numbers, you think you're measuring performance, but, you know, just remembering to ask what actually is the goal here, I think is the only way to really link that work to the actual business objective.
That's great. And how can this data be harnessed as a tool to enhance creativity? Because I know there's a natural tension that you just alluded to.
Yeah.
But, tell me about that.
Yeah, well, you know, we spent a lot of time with creators. We were all just, you know, a few months ago over at Cannes, and, you know, that topic came up a lot. And, I mean, basically, creatives have had this fraught relationship because, you know, if you can't act on the data, you know, the data's sort of not helpful for you, and it's kind of annoying, and you've got a lot of good reasons to question it, and it certainly doesn't add any value to your work. But, like, just to see that game shift when you give it to them tomorrow, and it's in the, you know, they're still working on the concepts, there's still time to change things. There's still time to go in a different direction. It's just a complete mindset shift. You know, we've just seen creators becoming real champions of actually finding out, you know, they want their work to be meaningful. They see the value to the businesses. So being able to show that those choices can, in many cases, generate 2, 3, 4, 5x more lift if they pick one thing, one kind of story, one kind of consumer, one aspect of the value prop that they're telling in a certain way. You know, that's just sort of game changing for their understanding of the consumer that they're trying to reach.
And what advice or best practices would you give for that effective collaboration between the data and creative teams, you know, especially with the potential pushback that the creative teams can start with?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about re-examining some of the processes. I think inadvertently a lot of processes have been built, you know, we do this briefing, we make this many concepts, we make a selection in this meeting. Every company's got their own version of this, they're all very different. But they've all been built around an assumption about what evidence is available when. And I think when that changes, when suddenly you can get a lot of evidence quickly, you start to say, hey, maybe, you know, we should have created more ideas earlier. Maybe those kind of off-the-wall, sort of zanier, kind of more risky ideas have a place in this process for longer. You know, that's part of what the creators are often the most excited about, that, you know, rather than just sort of having a committee shoot down cool, new, interesting, edgy ideas and just stick with the safe thing. You know, why not include some of these, you know, more risky ideas, maybe just telling the story in a funny or a new way, see if it works. So, you know, redesigning the process to make room for that at an earlier stage, I think, is, you know, really the central change that's useful.
Yeah, no, that's great advice, because I know that, you know, that tension always exists between the creatives and the scientists.
Yeah.
So, tell me some more about the implications for marketers and storytellers now that you can quantify the impact of that creativity, with the same ease that's, typically associated with performance marketing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of implications at both the business level and at the work level. At the business level, basically this means marketing organizations, consumer brands can do a lot more with less. If you're not wasting a lot of media dollars and production work on concepts that aren't generating lift or aren't generating as much lift, suddenly you're making more impact on consumer demand with the same resources. And I think that's really game-changing, especially in environments where budgets come under pressure. And I think there's real demand for accountability around, what are we all doing basically at work and what's it producing? At the work level, part of what's so exciting is really just breaking down that wall between, the data people and the numbers people and the creative people, because it's the creative people you want in the experimenting process. That they're fundamentally, we see our job as making them successful, rather than sort of standing over them and sort of saying what's right and wrong. We're there to kind of run the experiments that they think are interesting to run. Is their idea going to work? Are different consumer segments ones that they should start focusing on more, or telling the story to in a different way? The ideas are in their head, and kind of getting them out and into experiments and quickly kind of learning if there's evidence that they should ramp them up. I think that's kind of the biggest interesting transformation, I think, in that regard.
And going back to the beginning of the journey, 6 years ago, as you were talking about at the beginning, where you started and where you are now, what's changed on that path and sort of and what's evolved?
Yeah, I mean, in the early days, I think there was certainly more questions around how to do this. I think that the idea that you really need RCT data has become a lot sort of less controversial. I think in the early days there were other ways of doing this, and those had their proponents, but really they were just ways to get around the fact that the efficiency was a lot harder to solve. You couldn't get as many consumer respondents in an experiment, or doing the analysis took a lot of manual effort. So you would do it a way that wasn't as good, but then you would sometimes find arguments for doing it that way that maybe were kind of post hoc justifications more than they were kind of the real reason it was done that way. So that's really changed a lot. I don't really have that argument with people so much these days. I think people now just sort of want to do it as easily as they can and get the data that's the most trusted. Yeah, and of course, we've been growing really quickly, so every 6 months it's a whole different company, right? Because your whole functions that didn't exist before, and offices in new places and that kind of thing.
And so, speaking of that, what's next on the company's roadmap? I know there's the new tracker solution for brands, but where do you see the next 6 years?
Yeah, I mean, we have a really active R&D group. I mean, we just love experimenting, trying new stuff. We've got this sort of really active prototyping process, and some of the more exciting prototypes are just right at the cusp of being released. I mean, Tracker is something we've got incredibly strong feedback from our early set of trusted prototype users who've been getting really unprecedented insights, not just on how to change public opinion, but where public opinion is right now with regard to their brand. So we can sort of, not just learn, what people think, but how you change it and couple those two things together. And rather than getting that every year or every quarter, getting real-time updates on that as news events break, or as competitors make moves, or your campaigns roll out in different markets. Starting to really see the numbers move, because the measurement can be done much more precisely, I think is one really cool thing that's coming up pretty soon, actually.
Very cool. So I think we have time for one last question. And so looking at the future, what do you see the future of the intersection of data and creativity?
Yeah, I think this is a really great time to be in marketing, because, look, the big ideas finally connect with the technology. I think, look, we all love direct response marketing, but ultimately, the kind of click-through rate campaigns, the red-blue backgrounds, the sort of, experimenting with 15 taglines, that's one set of ideas. And I think the really big idea is about how do you tell a brand and its story. Finally, I think tech and data is offering real insights into whether that works. So I think it's a really good time to be in this business, and I think it's a really great community you've put together here over 19 years.
Thank you. And thank you for being here.